But in general, food plays a major role, right? Because food's going to have the nutrients to run your immune system, right? Our fat soluble vitamins, our antioxidants, zinc, magnesium, selenium, all play major roles with the immune system. Our antibodies are made from protein. So if you're not getting and digesting good protein, you're not going to be able to make good antibodies for your Th2 immune response. And then obviously, if you're eating a lot of inflammatory food, the more omega-6, the more you stimulate your prostaglandin E2, that's more the inflammatory side, the more you're going to have unprovoked immune responses, and you're just going to be chronically inflamed. And then you may have this cytokine storm thing we talk about because you don't have good balance to your immune system. And so also on top of that, right, we know how much carbohydrate, especially refined processed carbohydrate, it feeds a lot of bad bugs. So if you have a lot of fungus overgrowth, yeast overgrowth, bacterial overgrowth, these bugs prefer the refined processed foods, right? It's going to just be easier to digest, easier to feed them. And so you're going to create overgrowths like that. And these bad bugs obviously produce other types of toxins in your body, right? Bad bugs eat your nutrients and poop. And then versus eating your poop and producing nutrients, right? Bad bugs take the nutrients you're eating and they'll produce more toxins and endotoxins and different metabolites, lipoic acid, etc., versus producing B vitamins, producing vitamin K, producing different beneficial acids that prevent the colon from overgrowing, right? Probiotics, acidophilus literally translates to acid loving. And so good probiotics actually produce and lower the pH in the intestinal tract, which actually makes it harder for bad bugs to grow, right? Bugs tend to prefer a more alkaline type of environment to actually grow in the lower intestines.
That's a great point. I don't think many people know that about acidophilus. I'm glad you broke that down simply for people, that you actually want this lower pH environment, because that's not really a place for these pathogens to thrive, versus when you're on proton pump inhibitors, for example, right? Acid blocking medications, or if you've got an H. pylori infection, you're going to have that higher pH. You're going to have that more alkaline gut. And then that's where things really get into trouble. I mean, you and I think we've done a whole podcast on this, but the brief spark notes are lower stomach acid, age, stress, not chewing your food. That's going to increase malabsorption and feed the bugs too. So this, once again, goes back to the same thing we've said 100 times. You get your gut tested, figure out if you've got this overgrowth going on. Don't wait until you're in a critical situation. We got to get your gut fixed now. Think of working on your gut as preventative medicine. How revolutionary is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And then also when you consume too much carbohydrate, we talked about how you're going to feed the bad bugs. We talked about what the bad bugs do in regards to impeding nutrients, adding more toxins, right? Pooping poop, right? There was one more thing I wanted to kind of highlight on that realm. We talked about the gut permeability and the overstimulating the immune system. Also, high levels of carbohydrate. Glucose looks very similar molecularly to vitamin C. And so you have these macrophages, these little Pac-Men and Pac-Women that go along in the lymphatic system and in your bloodstream. They gobble up bacteria, gobble up viruses, gobble up crud. Vitamin C kind of docks on that macrophage and kind of supercharges the macrophage so it can gobble things up more. Guess what? Glucose can actually come in there and dock on that macrophage, and it can decrease the macrophage's ability to gobble things up. Now, in the literature likes to make things confusing. So there's kind of like two sets of language. There's like the lay language, right? Where we're kind of communicating it in a way that everyone gets it. In the literature, they'll call it the phagocyte index, right? PHAGOCYTES. So phagocyte with a PH, all right? So go on PubMed, type in phagocyte index, and you'll see that's the macrophage's ability to gobble critters and bacteria up. And so if we decrease the phagocyte index, it's going to be they're not going to be able to gobble things up as much. And so this is really important. And so high levels of glucose, high levels of insulin, which again, glucose and fructose stimulate insulin production, right? And so you're going to have less gobbling of your Pac-Men and Pac-Women in your bloodstream to be able to control these critters.
That's crazy. Okay, so you're saying if I'm in the hospital and the nurse or whoever brings me my lunch, which I saw when my grandmother was in the hospital a couple years ago for heart issues, you know what they brought her for lunch? It was this little like packet of peanut butter, which was corn syrup and like peanuts. And then I think it was probably a piece or two of bread. And then it was a little jelly packet. And guess what that was? Corn syrup and like fake artificial flavor and purple dye and whatever else. So you're saying That's not the optimal diet for good macrophage. I guess you would call it bug eating per se.
No, one, it's going to feed a lot of dysbiotic bacteria. Two, it's going to decrease the phagocyte index, so your body's ability to gobble up the bacteria and such. And then I would say on top of that, the more insulin resistance you have, because how it works is, right? You take in glucose, you take in fructose, right? When there's fiber attached to it, it actually decreases glucose and fructose's damage, i.e. like if I consume some fructose from blueberries, one, there's a bunch of antioxidants with the blueberries, a bunch of different quercetins and bioflavonoids and vitamin C on that. There's also fiber. So fiber kind of blunts the effects that you may get from fructose when you consume things like in form of blueberries or strawberries. But when you consume fructose without the fiber, i.e. high fructose corn syrup, right? Or table sugar, which is sucrose. Sucrose is fructose and glucose. High fructose corn syrup is just like 55-45 fructose to glucose, where table sugar is half and half, right? When you consume it without the fiber and out the nutrients, what happens is the body says, okay, we got to go store it in the liver. So the first place it goes to dump that fructose is store it in the liver. Once the fructose sources are done there, it can't store it anymore. It starts to convert it to fat. And then once the liver starts getting fatty, all this fructose just hangs around in the bloodstream, and it's creating all this oxidative stress. It's like putting barbecue sauce right on your chicken before you barbecue it. It creates this browning effect. And so when you have all this high level of fructose in your bloodstream, because your liver's saturated, your liver's now fatty, it can't store it anywhere else. You have high levels of insulin. Now you start browning all the arteries. And then what does that do? It creates inflammation. It makes your platelets and your blood cells just more sticky. So you have increased chances of clotting. What's going to happen when you have clotting in the lungs? It's going to create a whole bunch of lung stress, right? Obviously, heart issues if it's in the heart, brain issues if it's in the brain. And so if we can get the fructose and the high levels of insulin down, one, that's going to help blood flow. It's going to decrease your oxidative stress reserves. And so when you have high levels of oxidative stress, what does that do to your needs of vitamin E and vitamin A and vitamin C? It increases it, because your body's having to put out these fires, and think of these antioxidants as like the fire extinguisher. So it's wanting to use all these antioxidants. And of course, the fuel that feeds a lot of this stuff is going to be high sugar and crap that also feeds the bacteria, which then makes the immune response worse. So you can see all these things, they kind of compound on each other one after another.
Yeah, that was a great way to put it. That's what I was kind of picturing in my head, this snowball effect against you, and it gets nasty quickly.
It does. It really gets nasty.
And then if you're really, really bad, and then you're on the feeding tube, I mean, we've seen, and I know you've talked about this before with your some of your work in the medical industry years ago. I mean, you've talked about some of this stuff they feed people. It's bad. These feeding type solutions. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's just straight garbage. I don't have an ingredient list in front of me, but I know it's not good.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, sugar is used. It hits that opiate receptor, right? It's people use it to kind of modulate pain, modulate all the bad stuff that's happening. So it's, you know, it's very addicting, you know, once you're stuck on it.